We're just going to give it another minute or so. I can see the sun popping out for the first time in about 3 weeks. Is it right? Actually, I should take a photo of it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we might go ahead and get started. So happy International Women's Week, everybody. I know we're the day after right now. I hope you had some chance to celebrate, whether it just be a chat with a friend or lunch or another event that you've been to, or a conversation about, you know, the Grace Tame, Brittany Higgins press club conference. There's just so much kind of happening in this space and so much awareness in the public kind of arena right now. I'm Rupal Isman. I'm the director of the Sydney Knowledge Hub here at the University of Sydney. We're a research commercialization center that helps researchers bring their inventions to market to ultimately help change people's lives. And the Sydney Knowledge Hub and Incubate are really pleased to host this conversation today. But before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I am calling from Gadai land, where the Sydney Knowledge Hub is based, and I'd like to pay my respects to Gadigal elders past, present, and emerging. You know, I've been a part of a few conversations over the last few days, and they've been, you know, empowering and reflective and hilarious. And this conversation today is conversation 3 out of 4 of this series that the Sydney Knowledge Hub and Incubate are putting together. Yesterday, we heard from Natasha Rawlings at UniSeed on her journey to, you know, sit at the table and lead the conversation from venture capital land. Tomorrow, we hear from A.D. Robinson, who is the co-founder of Catalyzer, a B Corp that helps organizations engage staff with effective corporate social governance, social responsibility programs. I might pop that link in the chat, or Nina, if you can pop that registration link in the chat, that'd be great. But today, right now, I'm pretty excited to introduce our speaker today, who I've known for just, I think, about 2 years now, Dr. Amani Batarseh. Amani has been a bulldog of a chief scientist on a startup that not long ago IPO'd. She is leader in a space that is outnumbered by men, and she is a chief scientist at BCAL Diagnostics. She and BCAL Diagnostics are members of the Sydney Knowledge Hub, which is how we met. Amani's expertise combines molecular biology with lipidomics and mass spectrometry to answer biological questions. The BCAL team of scientists led by Amani is developing a novel blood screening test to improve early diagnosis and monitoring of breast cancer that is safe, cost-effective, and accurate, and available to all women regardless of age, race, and geographic location, which I didn't realize until talking to Amani, that's actually a problem for a lot of women recognizing and diagnosing breast cancer. So Amani's going to share her experience as a scientist pursuing a startup, after which I'll pop it open to all of you for questions. So Amani, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Rupal. Great introduction. I'm very humbled, so thank you for that. And yes, I've known Rupal for about 2 years, and she's been amazing in actually starting Sydney Knowledge Hub to the place where it is today, and bringing a number of researchers and people from industry together. So we're very excited to be part of it, and it has been very positive for BCAL. So thank you everyone for your time today. I'm very excited and humbled to actually be given the chance to speak to you about my experience and my story, and how I ended up where I am today. So it has been my lifelong dream to actually, as Rupal said, to be able to make an impact on society and change outcomes for for cancer research in general. And now I'm actually working on breast cancer. So working with BCAL Diagnostics, this dream inches closer to reality every day. And it really excites me because I can say happily that I have my dream job, and I believe everyone deserves to have the same. However, what I would like to also say is that the path to here was not straightforward. It was a path full of experiences, learnings, rising, crashing, burning, and rising back up again. And I think that's the most important part, is to take the failures as experientials and rise back from them again. So that's what we will talk about today as well. And I will share some my screen, with some slides that I've put together to guide some of our discussion today. So I started off, let me just remove my controller, sorry. Okay, so I was born in Jordan as an oldest of 5 girls in a male-dominated country. That wasn't particularly easy for me because I had a voice and I was opinionated and I had questions, and I was the wrong gender, you could say, almost, because I was not a boy. But that did not stop me, and I wasn't the submissive type, but that's okay. Maybe, as Rupal said, that makes me the bulldog, where I go after what I want and what I believe in. So the path to where I am today, I tried to put it on a map. So just to give a perspective. So growing up in Jordan, there was a lot of traveling and going to different places. And still, it might appear straightforward, but it wasn't. And a lot of it was in North America that a lot of the growing and experiencing has started, because I left Jordan when I was 17 years old. I'll talk more about that soon. And just to give me a snippet of it, that's just a zoom in on the different parts of the journey. So if we go back to my childhood, as I said, I grew up as the oldest of 5 girls, and I always loved science. It was what I really loved doing. So I'll just share one story of when I was about 8 years old, and I was mixing chemicals in my mother's bathroom. So she had 2 bottles of cleaning supplies, and one of them said, "Do not mix with that other type." And of course, I was very curious. And what do you think I would do? So I went ahead and I mixed them, and I was there with my sisters, and poof, it exploded. There was fumes and foaming going everywhere, and some chemical generating that was started falling over the ground, and I started panicking. So I wanted to put the vapors out, and I grabbed my mother's bathrobe and I put it on top. Needless to say, the vapors burnt through. So you could technically say they were likely toxic. So that's kind of more of what my experiments tended to look like when I was younger. However, on the flip side, I thought they were also associated with a lot of really good discoveries. So that explosion that I initiated, the liquid ended up falling all over the bathroom floor. And very quickly started seeing the grout going extremely white. And it was so amazing to me that I decided I will repeat the experiment because I needed more of the detergent that I created. And I cleaned up the whole bathroom. And that was me trying to make up for burning my mother's bathrobe. And so when my mom came back in, she was really impressed by the bathroom and asked what happened. And then I said, I confessed that I ruined her bathrobe in the process. And to that, she's like, "Well, what did you do? How did that happen?" So I explained that. And in my mind, I always thought I would be praised for it, but I actually got punished. Mainly because I got my sisters in trouble and myself potentially. I mean, who knows? I was in the house on my own. And so I didn't really agree with my mom, because I was sitting there and thinking to myself, someone should have been interested in what I just invented. I mean, I've reversed 15 years of grout usage in the process, and someone should take this, manufacture it, and commercialize it. But that wasn't how it turned out. So needless to say, that did not curb my curiosity. So I kept on investigating and trying to learn and so on. And part of it is really growing up in Jordan. I describe it as, because I grew up in quite a conservative family, but for my parents, education was the most important thing. So I couldn't go down the street for a coffee, but I could go to the US to study when I was 17 on a scholarship. So it was that mix that was always going on. But for that as well, I didn't really know many women scientists in Jordan. I certainly didn't have any in my family. And so from a very young age, I wanted to actually shift things. So I made sure that I wanted to become that scientist. And for me, Madame Curie was one of the people that I really looked up to. And I also wanted my own lab. So my experiments in the bathroom was that first step at having my own lab. Then I can say I went through a path of learning and education. And as I said earlier, it was not really straightforward, but that allowed me to become what I consider today a real scientist, doing something I really love that is starting to hopefully very soon make a positive impact. So I left Jordan when I was 17, and I had a scholarship where I went to study in the US, and a lot of the story will start in the US. So I started off in LaRouche University, and I did graduate there with distinction, which allowed me to go into my next stage of doing my PhD at Georgetown University. Halfway during my PhD, my lab moved over to McGill University in Canada, and I decided to follow my advisor. So I helped him establish the lab there. And there was a lot of growth during that time. But one story I'd like to actually share about my PhD, and I would like to talk about as well as here, is some of the challenges that I had. One of them was doubt. So during my PhD, when you first do a PhD in the US, you do different rotations in labs, and you have to choose a lab to stay in. And one of the first PhD advisors that I met with sat me in her office one day, and she said, "Amani, you're not PhD material. You will never graduate. So you might as well just save us the resources and quit." And I didn't obviously listen to her. So I just changed labs and I moved to another lab, which actually ended up 2 labs later, I ended up with my PhD advisor, who is still today one of my mentors and people that I really aspire to be like someday. And the second part after McGill is I actually went to Harvard University to do a postdoc. And you'd think by then I must have figured my path out. It's all laid out. I'm at one of the best institutions in the world, so what could go wrong? And a lot could go wrong. So I had an advisor who, I don't know if it was cultural differences, a lot of things were in play, but there was a lot of different types of harassments that happened. And to me, the most shocking of all was when he said to me one day, you do realize you're a woman and your place is in the kitchen. And the only reason you are here is because I am allowing you to be here. And that really was shocking, because I thought, wow, I thought I've heard everything. I thought I crossed all the barriers, but here I am. And rather than potentially walking away, I actually thought, because I am a fixer as a personality, I was like, I can fix this, I can prove myself. So I spent almost that year trying to prove that I am a good scientist and I deserve to be there. And what happened, actually, it was a very toxic environment. And I was one of very many people that were constantly harassed and abused. So nonetheless, it had to take a toll on my health and my life, psychologically, spiritually, mentally, before one day I decided this is not right, and this should stop. So I quit. Actually, one day I just walked in and I said, that's it, I'm out. But I did make my position clear. I said, I don't agree with what happened here, and I want this to be an example for everybody else that comes after me. I don't want somebody else to go through the same abuse, but I will just walk away. But that walk away came at an expense. I actually got to a point where I believed him. I believed that I was a crap scientist, and maybe what he's saying makes sense, and maybe that PhD advisor in Georgetown was right, and I pushed my way all the way to here, but this is it, it's over. So I took a year off. It wasn't really off as a holiday, it was a recuperation time, because I ended up hitting a really bad burnout. I completely crashed. And it took me a while to bring myself back. And during that time, I ended up talking to a lot of my friends back at McGill. And they're like, are you really sure you don't want to do science anymore? And I said, well, maybe not really. Maybe it's not the case. So I ended up going back to McGill University, where I was actually interviewing for a position where it was a molecular biology position, because that was my PhD. But what I really wanted to do was mass spectrometry and lipids. I was like, how could I take a position that I have virtually no real life training on? But they wanted to give me a chance. And I said, I learn fast. If you're willing to give me a chance, I'm willing to do what it takes to get there. And so I started that work, and very soon I became the lab manager. I was actually that was the first step that when it comes to mass spec and lipids, that added that extra facet to my background, where I had my PhD in molecular biology. I did study cancer and breast cancer specifically, but in vitro. And now I started morphing to learning this new technique about mass spectrometry and lipids, and it was really a passion of mine. And I finally found my niche. I was like, this is where I really belong. Excuse me. So during that time, I ended up going to Max Planck Institute in Germany to learn about lipidomics out of one of the lead labs in the world, in Andrew Shevchenko's lab. And that was a major improvement for my career, and helped me establish the lipidomics facility at McGill University. Also moved a couple of labs, but we can skip over that. But during that same time, I also went to a conference. Sorry, went ahead of myself, but went into a conference on mass spectrometry, and that's where I met my now husband, who's a very bright scientist as well. So we met, and it was him coming to Canada or me moving to Australia. And during that time, at the same conference, I met 2 scientists from Australia who were working on mass spectrometry and lipidomics, but they were using ozone. And almost that takes me back to my childhood. I'm like, ozone in a mass spec, what? So I was really excited and I wanted to move there and learn from them. So that made it easy. But in the first part of the move to Australia, I went to University of Melbourne. I did an honorary fellowship there on lipidomics, and then to Wollongong for a couple of years. And again, there's another learning that we have here. So I ended up changing my lab. So before I left my PhD, my advisor said to me, Amani, it's the wild world out there. Why don't you stay? I will help you establish your own lab here and you can run your own group. And it's really a fast track. If you are the kind who's willing to stay in the same field, that could be a fast way to success potentially in the field. However, I didn't want to be the bird that never left the nest. So I wanted to know that I can actually make it out there somewhere else. So I did move on, but what happens when you change your careers after your PhD, and me changing fields completely rather than going on a continuation, was kind of almost reinventing myself. So that kind of affected the number of publications I had. And what we have in academia is the publish or perish. So there comes doubt again and raises its head. So I was having discussions at the end of my postdoc in 2017 about what can I do next. A lot of the people I spoke to said, Amani, you've changed fields, and yes, it's bold and it's great, and changed countries and continents, but it doesn't matter. If you don't have enough publications, you're not really a scientist. So the best thing you could try to get, there's really no place for you in academia. There's no place for you in industry. Perhaps just take a technician's job. I was like, for a moment, I believed that again. And I was like, no, that's not right. So I ended up having a discussion with another distinguished professor at University of Wollongong. And I was telling him that one of my what I consider one of my biggest skills actually is visualizing what I want. And I go out there and I make it happen. So he said to me, let's just, if there are no limits, what would you do? And so I sat there with him and I described my dream job and what it would look like. And I'm really happy to say that shortly after it materialized. And that was my job at BCAL Diagnostics. And there I am. So the lesson of that is that the path may not always be clear. And sometimes you just have to go out there and make it. And there will be always people that will doubt you. And you might also believe it. I did, certainly, until I went back to my core and I found what I really stand for and changed that. So that's just some of the challenges that we faced. And then, so from that, there was a number of learnings that I would take forward. And some of those learnings, if we go back now, is the stereotypes that face women. So there are stereotypes that women actually perform worse in math and science than boys. And I can also say I had a real example of that. So when I was growing up, I wanted to be a doctor in medicine. And in my country, you have to sit for a national exam. So you have 59,000 people sitting for the same exact test. And before I walked in to the test, we had a math exam. My mother was a teacher, so they hand out notices to teachers about things to look out for. And for some reason, my mom said, just read this. And she had a number of really good points, but one of them stuck with me, which was girls are worse at spatial recognition than boys. They are more inclined to really do bad in math questions that require such a skill. And so up to that point, I had prided myself in my ability to actually have great 3D recognition. I walk into the exam and there was this question about it requires an ant that was in the side of the room that you have to measure the distance to the other side of the room. I looked at the question and I had the solution within a split second. I was like, oh, this is the answer. And then I looked at the test. I remembered what I read. Then I looked at the exam question. It was 35 points. I was like, 35 points surely can't be true. I mean, how could they put so many points in a question that is so simple to do? So I overcomplicated it and didn't get it right. And so I felt that my dreams of becoming a doctor and my future just started shattering. And it wasn't until I actually stopped caring that I aced the rest of my exams. So still top 99 percentile in the country, just not where I really wanted to be. And then I did some science research about this actually recently before this talk. And it had actually been shown that boys don't do math and science because they are better. They do it because they think they are better and because they are sometimes told that they are better. And there was a study that came that same exact year as my high school in 1999, where they showed that they took two groups and they told the first group of boys and girls that boys perform better at math questions than girls. And you can see on the left side of the screen, the girls performed at 5 points is what they scored compared to 25. And when they told the boys and the girls that they performed just as well as each other, there was almost no significant difference between the two. And that is just to say that we can actually expose girls to better role models. We can teach them that they can overcome such stereotypes. And at that point, I realized that nothing really restricts my success more than what I believe and my fears. So that is something that is very important for us to overcome. But there is good news too, is that we can also nurture that in our girls and boys and in everyone. And because even if we just make someone believe that they can do better and they can grow intellectually, it does actually improve their outcome. So another part to look at that is the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. And a fixed mindset, you believe that your intelligence is static, your abilities are already well defined. So if you're not good at something, you just don't do it, just because it's just not for you. However, on a growth mindset, you believe that intelligence can be developed. You can embrace challenges, you can try things, and you can get better. Now, I am where I am today, and I can tell you that I am still actually struggling between the two, because I was very much raised as a fixed mindset kid. I was always told, oh, you're so brilliant. So I believe that I was born with a certain amount of intelligence, which was supposed to be a lot. But for things that I couldn't be good at, I stopped doing them. And it wasn't until after Harvard, actually, when I had that whole breakdown, that I decided, you know what, that's it. I've reached the top of science, was what I thought it was. And I could potentially think that I failed, but now is my time to go out there, start something new, something I can actually potentially fail at. I want to learn to fail, because from failing, I will learn to succeed again. And that's the reason I'm saying that is to say, I'm still learning and I continuously will be learning. But it is important that if we teach that to the children, rather than saying to a child, you're really smart because they've done something really impressive, it's better if we tell them, you've really worked hard at this and I can notice it. And wow, you're smart. So they can actually feel that if they worked at something, they can potentially get better at it. And then that would allow them to be more able to accept criticism, for example, be inspired by others' success rather than be threatened by them. So that's a really important part, because if you are in that fixed mindset, you just want to feel that nobody can beat you. But if you're in a growth mindset, you look at everybody else that's succeeding, like, what are they doing that I can learn from? And you also support them on their journey. And so both of you are growing. So the other one, and what I consider is the secret for me now, as I mentioned earlier, my struggle with doubt. And a secret to success is to really be able to silence those fears and silence the doubt. It will be there. Stop trying to silence it, I would say. But just learn to harness that doubt to see how you could shape it to actually make you the best version out of yourself, rather than actually let it suck you down and then paralyze your productivity and progression. And the more favorite one, I don't know if anyone, some people hear of this, and actually it affects about 70% of really successful people. And you have to be really successful to qualify. It doesn't just, you don't just get it. And that is what we call imposter syndrome, where a lot of people have it, but they don't even have a name for it. A lot of people don't even understand it. So I asked one of my friends who's a really successful person, do you ever suffer from imposter syndrome? He's like, no, surely not. I was like, wow, that's amazing, really? So then I described it to him. I said, he said, do you know what it is? And he said, well, not really. What is it? So basically what imposter syndrome is, normally you're a successful person. Normally you're highly achieving, but you have this intrinsic fear thinking that everybody has this overinflated image of you because they don't really know the true you. And over time, they will find out who the true you is. And then you'll be exposed and you'll be a fraud and they'll be all over. And the other part about it is that you actually always tend to attribute your success to something other than your effort. So you're always like, I just got lucky. They're really nice to me. They just don't know any better. When the time comes, everybody will find out and this will be over. And it's really interesting to say that when I looked into it, if you look in the arts fields, we have Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep, one of the most awarded actors and actresses of all time. They believe they're imposters. It was really interesting when Mark Cannon-Brookes, for example, his software in Atlassian is being used on Mars, and he thinks he's an imposter. So it's not that it's not something unique. It does happen. But the important, if actually to speak a bit about the background, it was identified in 1978 in a paper that was titled "The Imposter Phenomenon in Highly Achieving Women." And that was mainly because initially they thought it was only women that actually struggle with this, you can call it syndrome, but it's not really a syndrome because it's not a mental health disease. It's just a status of how you think. But it's, again, there are different reasons why it can happen. In some situations, it's because of a really toxic environment the person was growing on, or having an alcoholic abusive parent. Or on the other flip side, which I can say was my problem, is when the child is being put on a pedestal and you're telling them that they're really amazing and they're a prodigy and they will be able to conquer anything they want. I'm not trying to cry here saying, oh, my parents loved me too much, but it was that, and I'm very grateful for my parents, but it was more of having that standard where you're constantly trying to achieve. So I was that child who would come home and I would say to my mom, I got 99.5% on a test. And then rather than saying, great, she's like, well, why did you lose the 0.5? And if I say I got 100%, well, how many people got 100%? And if I say there was a bonus question, how many people got the bonus question? So it was always like, you're just never good at it. It's just always something more to achieve. But again, as I said earlier, harness your doubts, harness your fears, but you can also harness the imposter syndrome. So actually people who could potentially have imposter syndrome, I did for a while, I still do, it doesn't go away. But what goes away is the way that you handle it. So I started harnessing it for my success instead of actually using it as something that I'm afraid of. So a lot of people who succeed and have imposter syndrome, they end up just quitting. They could have the best job of their lives or the best career path, but they're just because they're thinking, once they're exposed, it will all be over. They just end up quitting instead. And I would say, don't quit. Just do the best that you can and keep going forward. And in fact, people who have imposter syndrome, they tend to double check their work. They're very analytical. They're trying to make sure they're doing the best they can all the times, and they're not overlooking any corners. So in a way, that's a really good trait to have, especially if you are trying to break new frontiers, because you're always trying to look where probably other people aren't even looking. So don't be ashamed of it, embrace it, and harness it for your success. And one way that helps, I'm still working on it even myself, is to actually take a stock of your achievements. And by the way, I didn't make these slides. I took them out of a great video on BBC. It's about 4.5 minutes and it's fantastic. So the link to that is in the bottom. But what it talks about is actually take a real stock objectively of your achievements of your life. So if you've achieved a certain part, which in this example is getting your dream job, which is mine, to write down objectively, what did you do to get there? What did you do right? And also assign what did you do that you think is really just sheer luck. And chances are you will find out that you've done so much work that allowed you to be there. People are not around just like fools, because if you look at them, a lot of people are really successful themselves. So why do you think you're such a great actor that you can fool everyone around you? So it's just a really comforting thing. If you actually take a stock, just stop for a moment and have that objective review, and be that person that looks back to yourself and tap yourself on the back and say, pat yourself on the back and say, well done. You actually did work really hard to get to where you are today. And the last part of my talk is about mentors and role models. It's a really integral part of your career, of anyone's career, in my experience. So as I said earlier, there are a lot of people that doubted me. And had I listened to them, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be with you here today. I wouldn't be working on my dream job. I wouldn't be leading a brilliant team of scientists that I'm so proud of at BCAL Diagnostics, and working with other people at BCAL that are really great at what they do. Who knows what I would have been? But I'm not really interested in that. And I'm thankful that they all said no, because as Einstein said, I went out there and I did it myself. So there are many other examples in my past. And the most important part for myself and what drives me forward is to just see the doubters, but believe in myself anyway, and keep going forward. And now when someone tells me there's no way this thing will work out, I actually commit myself to it, because I've proven to myself once and again that when people told me this will fail, I proved that it can be a success. And so I'm not saying be stubborn and just go that way, but I'm saying just mindfully, objectively evaluate. And if you believe in it and you see the skills and the abilities of it and the vision, most importantly, then go for it. And when it comes to the mentors, I would say finding a great mentor that believes in you really does change your life. And the same thing with having a PhD advisor, for example, for me. They can make you or break you. So whether it's industry or whether it's academia, take your time to find someone that can bring the best out of you. And two of my examples is my PhD advisor, who's now the Dean of pharmacy in California at USC. He's someone I really use his example every day, and how now that I went from just being a scientist to having a team, the way he managed us as a team, I wouldn't say he managed us, he actually was a leader, and he is a leader because he has the big vision, and he wasn't just stuck on the small stuff, and he knew how to motivate people to be the best version out of themselves. And till today, we actually grew up and became almost like family. So that is a privilege for me. And the second one, I will not talk too much about because she may be or may not be on the call, and it's someone in industry. And I'm really fortunate to be working with Jane, who's the chair at BCAL Diagnostics, because she's a true visionary and she believes in making a difference in women's health. And to have someone that you can work with that shares your passion, that sees my strengths and sees my weaknesses, and when I'm down, she knows how to bring me back up. That's a real true honor for me. And recently, as Rupal said, we were able to take the company and list us on the Australian Stock Exchange. We won't go through all the people that told us that will never happen over the last year. And of course it did happen, and we're here now. And BCAL is growing and we're doing a great job. And I think everybody at the company truly loves what they do. And that's a real true privilege. And for that, thank you. And I'll move on for that one. Sorry, Jane. I did talk to Jane about the slides, but she didn't know about that one. So the final part I'd like to say is that I still sit back now. And I'm like, when I look back at my life, I'm like, this little girl from Jordan, exploding chemicals in her mother's bathroom when she was 8, and now all the way here in Australia, working with an amazing team, working on revolutionizing breast cancer detection for women everywhere. I feel like I'm a proof that if you have the dreams and you believe in them, you can make them come true. And with that, I thank you all for your attention. And I hope I didn't take way too much out of your time. And I'm very happy to be contacted if anyone has any questions or if I can be of any help to anyone. Thank you with that.
Well, it's a shame that we're not all in person, because I feel like we all need to do a standing ovation. That was truly wonderful, Amani. Thank you for sharing that. That was a wonderful story. And I feel like you chose the wrong job, because I feel like you should be an educator. Like really good tips and advice. So thanks so much. It was beautiful. I'm gonna just make a couple comments, and while I'm doing that, if anyone wants to post any questions on the chat, we'll see if we can get to them. But I wanted just to touch on a couple of things that you talked about. You mentioned imposter syndrome, which I think that, you know, a lot of women, I was in a panel a couple of days ago, and, you know, does anyone have imposter syndrome? And I think like literally all the women raised their hand, and like the 8 guys in the room, I think maybe one of them raised their hand. But something else that was said in another session that I was in was that women are natural collaborators. And that really resonated with me, because as collaborators, we attribute success to the team and to others and so forth. So I wonder if those go, you know, potentially hand in hand a little bit. I also wanted to talk about being an immigrant. You know, we both have an immigrant experience. You know, one, I think that the positives of being an immigrant is that when you move to another country, people don't know how to pinpoint you. Like the stereotypes are a little bit different, because, you know, what's a woman of Indian descent that's American doing in Australia? Like there's no other people to compare me to. So you can kind of really be whoever you want, which I think is just immensely liberating. But the other thing about having, you know, Jordanian and Indian mothers is that, you know, I'll speak for myself. I can't say if your mother was like this, but, you know, we've had this both where my mother was so incredibly influential and wanted me to be a success professionally. You know, when, I mean, she was a professional success. She was a doctor, but it's very, very hard for her. But at the same time, you know, wanted me to abide by gender roles as well. So she wanted me to cook all the Indian dinners and, you know, learn how to sew and do all these things. And it's just this funny thing where she wanted it all for me. So maybe that's why I moved away, but.
And I do share that same experience, yes. Yes.
Well, I'm just gonna go on with a couple other questions if I don't see any questions. So, well, I mean, this is, I guess, another kind of comment is that, you know, we look about the same age. I think we're probably about the same age, and it's amazing how when I first started my career as well, like there was just such overt sexism that happened. And like, I feel like I mentally feel like I'm that same age. So it doesn't really feel like there's been that much time, but I do also want to kind of like recognize how far we've come. Like, I can't imagine, I had a woman colleague of mine who essentially said, closed the door behind me, in this office, and said that I dressed promiscuously when I didn't. And even if I did, and that I just can't imagine that would happen, or someone would have the gumption to say that out loud in this current environment that, particularly in the last year, how much the conversation has been elevated and how much it's in public awareness. That wasn't really a question. Yeah, does anyone have any questions or any comments from you, Amani, on anything that I said?
I think for me, so I think the change happened is that growing up in Jordan, yes, I grew up in a very conservative family. And then when I moved to the US, I had that bit of more of expressing myself. So maybe, yes, the way I dressed has changed. And when I went to the US, I was on a scholarship to the university, La Roche University, based on academic excellence. And I was selected as 1 out of 15 students out of all of the kingdom in Jordan. So some of those were boys and some of them were girls. And the boys were basically saying the same thing. You're a girl and why are you dressed like this? Meanwhile, they were doing everything in the book. So it's like, well, I'm a boy, of course I can do it, but you're a girl, you must abide by the rules of how we were grown up. So yes, you face that same thing. I think when it came to my PhD, I just think not a lot of people really wanted to do molecular biology. So it was easy for a girl to make it through. And the example at Harvard, a person who made it all the way to Harvard and he still believed that my place should be in the kitchen. So it can easily be that you can fall for those stereotypes or biases or discrimination. But as long as you're living with your own moral compass, with integrity, with authenticity, I think that's the most important part, and the exterior does not matter.
Mm-hmm. When you were moving around from country to country and from school to school, and just, you had a lot of kind of different experiences, did you have some kind of, I guess, formal or informal mentor or a dear friend or something like that that could give you kind of that external cheerleading or support? Like, did you kind of see the value of that mentorship earlier on in your career, as it was, I guess, harder to kind of pull that mentor along with you?
Yes, and I think that's your comment on education is where it's interesting. And I think if all teachers, even when we are in primary and middle school, high school, if they recognize how impactful their parts are, I think a lot of teachers would behave differently. But to me, I was really fortunate that I had three different teachers at different stages. One of them that really inspired me was a woman who was a physicist. As a physics teacher, but she was, covers her head and her hair, and because Jordan is a male-dominated country, but it's also very religious, and in that sense, she was covered. And people like, how could she be a physicist? How? So there's that. But then I also had a biology teacher in high school who really believed in me, and he said, Amani, you can do this. And I remember he stood in front of the class one day, and he said, this girl will do something one day. And to me, it meant a lot because I was one of 5 girls. I was growing up, that my mom never had that boy, and my father's name will die after I go get married. And to me, that really affected me. So to have teachers like that really helped pave the path. And I'm really lucky to actually say, my mentors haven't just been women. Actually, some of the toughest people on me have been women in some cases. I think that's the other part of the bias that we have to also talk about, how women can come together to help each other shine, rather than having to take their struggle that they've gone through and say, I've worked really hard for how I got here, and so should you. Mm-hmm. Well, do you really have to? I mean, if someone is really smart and committed and willing to do the work, I think we should help each other rise. And more so, if we can, just break the whole gender difference. Just be a CEO, just be a CSO, just be a teacher. It doesn't have to be, I'm a woman this or I'm a male that. So for me, I think that's also what makes a difference.
That's great. So we have a question from Sergey. Thanks, Sergey. Was it an easy decision for you to move from academia to industry? Okay, so thank you, Sergey.
I would say it wasn't easy because it really wasn't clear as a path at the time. I thought even industry required, and that goes back to my fixed mindset. I thought, how can I go to industry if I haven't done A, B, and C? And then the growth mindset came in, and I saw an opportunity and I decided to apply myself. For me, industry made a lot more sense because I can see faster translation of what I'm doing. Not to say academia is not good. It's great for the people who have that path that they want to just pursue purely in academia. But I wasn't the person who just wants to publish to get that grant, where that grant can help me publish again to get another grant with some discoveries that are slowly evolving along the way. I wanted to see that impact much more in real life and faster if possible. So I can't say it's hard or easy. It's just more, is it the right fit or it isn't? So if for me, it's just going with what resonates with my soul's purpose. And this exactly definitely resonated. And that's where the decision came from.
And kind of along with that question, was there, this is a bit of a personal question, but was there a big difference in kind of salary or security of jumping from academia to industry at your stage, or, you know, at the age you were at?
Yes, there was, but to start, maybe there wouldn't have. But I think after working well and proving what I can do, definitely the growth was faster than you would in academia.
You started off low, but you were able to kind of progress your career quicker.
Well, not lower than academia, because I think we never get paid enough in academia. And definitely I would say going from academia in the US and Canada to Australia, that was already a big jump because you guys here you get paid a lot better. Life is more expensive, but you do get paid better. I think it all depends on how you prove your value. That's what they pay on. It's not just because you're in industry, you get paid a certain amount. It's how much, and it's not because always, actually, that's the thing I should have added. It's not about what you just know. And that's something I apply now, even with my team and with the people that I'm hiring into my team. It's not what you already know for me. It's what you know, but how fast you can learn new things, how well you can apply them, and how fast you do that, and the value generated from that. So that's, I think, what correlates with how much sometimes you get paid. But of course, there are different barriers, and it's not easy. It's not to say startups or industry is easy. Starting up with BCAL, at some point, I was the only scientist in the lab, but I was doing so many different jobs and different hats, and it never was about 9 to 5. That did not exist, still doesn't exist for me. So that's, where the correlation comes in. But I never took a job because of the dollar value ever in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think that's all the time that we had. I wish you could, you probably can't see all the chats, but that was so awesome. I think everyone really enjoyed that talk. It was truly, truly wonderful, Amani. So
thank you so much.
Thank you to Nina and Imogen at Incubate for leading this series, and thank you to Andrew and Sasha on my team for helping coordinate it. Amani, that was so awesome. I can't thanks for your time. I know you're really busy, and that was a really great, thoughtful way that you kind of laid out your journey. And I can't wait till you're back in space at the City Knowledge Hub, because I want more of you in my life. So thank you again. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Rupal. Thank you, everyone. Thanks
for joining, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.